Hello, this is Tim, and this is part 4 of my Vampire the Masquerade 2nd Edition RPG review, dealing with the old World of Darkness. And I stopped with the generations in the last video, so I'll get right into that. Like I said, Cain is basically the originator of the vampiric curse. The 2nd generation, there's supposedly 3 members were created, and they were created because of Cain's loneliness. They may all be dead. The Book of OWOD talks a little bit about that. I think that was actually put out as not really a splat book, but just a book that actually just has the chronicles of that, all the actual story. I don't actually own that, but I think I've seen that in the store. 3rd generation, they're called the Antediluvians, dealing with the actual, flood concept. They are the founders of the vampiric clans. They are manipulators, dominators. Some may have reached Golconda, and there's others that don't want to reach that state. And as I said, in the different clans, there's myths about some of them still caring about their bloodline, or others who don't care at all, and some that have been destroyed via diablerie and other methods. The 4th and 5th generation, they're mostly Methuselahs. They're still very powerful. They form the inner circle of the Camarilla for the most part, and many of them are in the Incarnu. The 6th, 7th, and 8th generation are the majority of the princes in the Primogen, the counselors, 8th generation is the last generation viewed as elders. 9th and 10th generation, many of them are ancilla. Most are embraced in the modern era. They sort of bridge the gaps between the anarchs and the elders. The 11th, 12th, and 13th generation, they're mostly called neonates, and most characters belong to this generation. And the 14th and 15th generation. There's very few kindred in this generation, and 15th can't sire progeny at all. Their blood is too thin. And I believe there was a supplement for that for the lower generations. But like I said, most are 11th, 12th, or 13th. The standard book starts you out at 13th. But again, if you're storyteller, once you start out at a different generation, you can do that. It's pretty flexible as far as that goes. Okay. Again, if you want to lower your generation, there's a generation background trait where you can actually pay for it. And remember, the generation is not age, not necessarily. If there's an old vampire out there that never sired a progeny, and they come to the modern era and sire one, they'll be a generation higher than them. So if they're like 4th generation and it's 1990 and they sire a progeny, the progeny is going to be 5th generation. So try to keep that in mind. And by using diablerie, or basically drinking a lower generation vampire, you can lower your own generation. But again, that's kind of frowned upon. There's a big lexicon. I had debated about reading through it. I think that'll take too long. But there are lots of vocabulary words in this game. I've kind of gone over some of them. There's lots of different terms, and there's terms that the older vampires use and the younger vampires use. And there's some that are almost like vampiric slang words. But they're very cool. It's worth checking out. And then we kind of get into the storytelling chapter, basically for the GM of the game. And it talks a little bit about player motivations. And they should be, involved in the creation of the story, listen to their input. Pretty much standard suggestions. And reasons for them to enjoy role-playing. So basically they want to be somebody that's completely different than themselves. They enjoy problem solving, possibly, sense of accomplishment, to gain power, to be with friends, to experience strong emotions, and to experience a form of catharsis. And that's kind of the motivations of players and what they want to do. So it just kind of goes through that a little bit. Talks a lot about suspense, and that since this is a horror game, that would be part of it. That fear is more than simply essential in horror, it is quintessential. Anxiety is the emotion you want your players to feel. Suspense though, is anticipation and dread as well. Players should never know what is coming next. You should always try to mix it up. The strangeness of vampiric life should be discovered as the game progresses. Pacing should keep the players in the moment. If they dawdle too long, try to make something happen to move them on. There shouldn't be a lot of downtime or too much downtime. Again, this is kind of like every storyteller might do it a little bit differently, but these are just suggestions. It says use descriptive words to build up anticipation and dread. Don't describe everything, though. Make the player's imagination fill in the holes that you leave. Unanswered problems can be used, such as a missing retainer. That will kind of drive, they go to sleep one night, they wake up the next day, and they're just gone. That's an example that they give for things you can do. It's important to give breaks from the horrific. All horror all the time isn't a good way to run a chronicle. Suspense is good, but break it up with relaxing times, enjoyable times, and even humor and comedy as well. Deadlines in games can be very motivational. If Prince says that something has to be done by a certain time, or else for instance, like the Sabbat is going to intrude in this area, that's a pretty strong deadline. Maybe to find some ancient vampiric artifact, for instance. When creating your chronicle, make sure there are lots of juicy secrets. Mystery adds another layer to vampire. So if you come up with anything, I always try to come up with a secret as well. There's this group of vampires over here, there's a pack of Sabbat vampires over here, and here's a secret associated with them. So while you're running the game, you can just look and go, okay, I'm going to include this in the game. Or, maybe one of your characters is looking around a little bit more, and they find the secret out that could lead the chronicle in a totally different direction. Plotting and intrigue are the meat and drink of vampiric existence. Characters should be constantly confused and confronted with the machinations of plots and powerful vampires. Eventually they might learn some of the truth of this, but it might take them some time. Begin the story in a small scale and then increase that scale. Encourage friendships with mortals and then kill them off slowly or randomly, and basically bring in that tragic element. They really enjoyed hanging out with this person, and then because of their involvement with you, perhaps they were destroyed. But again, these are all just suggestions, however you want to take them. And some of those mortals could be spies for other vampires. You can have a lot of fun with that. It goes into detail about flashbacks, parallel stories, foreshadowing, dream sequences, symbolism, etc. A lot of those are pretty standard GMing techniques, although some of them aren't used very often. I guess in some situations those could be considered advanced GMing or storytelling techniques. There's a small part on live-action role-playing or LARPing, because vampire LARPs are very, very popular. I know at least one in my hometown and some in Pittsburgh as well. And there's a section on do's and don'ts. It says, do keep all the characters in mind. Do go beyond the rules. Do encourage players to roleplay among themselves. Do take breaks. Do encourage player input. And then a list of don'ts. Don't take away the character's free will. Don't force the characters into a predetermined plot. You don't want to have the railroad tracks laid out, especially in a political game like this. Don't let luck rule everything in the plot. Don't cater to stereotypes. And don't ignore characters' traits, and especially their weaknesses and derangements and any sort of negative thing on their character sheet. There is a section of the Book of OWOD in this book, and it might be good for me to read it. I'm not really sure. I don't know if that'll take up too much time, but I've already gone into a bunch of videos, so maybe I should. And here's the Book of OWOD. In the beginning, there was only Cain. Cain who murdered his brother out of anger. Cain who was cast out. Cain who was cursed forever with immortality. Cain was cursed with the lust for blood. It is Cain from whom we all come, our sire's sire. For the passing of an age he lived in solitude, in loneliness and suffering. For an eon he remained alone, but the passing of memory drowned his sorrow, and so he returned to the world of mortals, to the world his brother and his brother's children had created. He returned and was made welcome. The people saw his power and worshipped him, making him king of their great city, the first city, a place by the name of Enoch. Though he became ruler of a mighty nation, he was still alone, for none were as he. His sorrow grew once again. Then he committed another great sin, for he begat progeny, of which there were only 3. And from them came more progeny, his grandchildren. And then Cain said, An end to this crime, there shall be no more. And as Cain's words was the word of law, his brood obeyed him. The city stood for many ages, and became the center of a mighty empire. And then came the deluge, a great flood that washed over the world. The city was destroyed, and its people along with it. Again, Cain fell into great sorrow and went into solitude, becoming as a dog amidst the waves, and leaving his progeny to their own ends. They came to him and begged him to return, to help them rebuild the city. But he would not come with them, saying the flood had been sent as a punishment for his having returned to the world of life, and subverting the true law. So they returned alone to what mortals were left, and announced that they were the new rulers. Each created a brood, in order to claim the glory of Cain. Yet they did not have his wisdom or restraint. A great war was waged, the elders against their children, and the children slew their parents. The rebels then built a new city, and brought to it 13 tribes. It was a beautiful city, and its people worshipped them as gods. They created a new progeny of their own, the 4th generation of Cainites. But they feared the jihad, and it was forbidden for those children to create others of their kind. This power their elders kept for themselves. When a child was created, it was hunted down and killed, and its sire with it. Though this city was as great as Cain's, eventually it grew old. As do all living things, it slowly began to die. The gods at first did not see the truth, and when they at last looked about them, it was too late. Their city was destroyed and their power extinguished, and they were forced to flee, their progeny along with them. But many were killed in the flight, for they had grown weak. With their authority gone, all were free to create their own broods, and soon there were many new kindred who ruled across the face of the earth. But this could not last. Over time, there came to be too many of the kindred, and then there was war once again. The elders were already deep in hiding, for they had learned caution. But their children had founded their own cities and broods, and it is they who were killed in the great wave of war. There was war so total that there are none of that generation to speak of themselves any longer. Waves of mortal flesh were sent across continents, in order to crush and burn the cities of the kindred. Mortals thought they were fighting their own wars, but it is for us that they spilt their blood. Once this war was over, all of the kindred hid from one another, and from the humans that surrounded them. In hiding, we remain today, for the jihad continues still. And sorry if that was a bit long, but it has a lot of flavor to it, and it really influences the setting. And what's interesting about this book is it has mechanics, but it has lots of setting in through the mechanics. The mechanics really do kind of meld pretty well with what they're trying to accomplish. And the next segment talks a little bit about time. There are turns, scenes, chapters, story, and chronicle. And turns basically like round. Scene is pretty much like a combat or interaction, a social interaction. And it just kind of goes on from there. Talks about rolling dice, like when the success of an action is in doubt or the storyteller thinks you have a chance to fail, you roll the dice. So really, it tells you don't roll the dice all the time, Just try to have more of the interaction and don't always let the dice decide what happens in the game. And really, as a storyteller, you have that right to call for a dice roll. And if there's a dice roll made in this kind of counting game, it's good sometimes to just let that success ride for the entire scene. Don't make them roll over and over and over again. If they made the roll once, that's probably good enough. Just let it go with that. And I'll get more into the mechanics and a little bit of that in the next video and how the game system actually works. But again, I like the flavor of this game. The art is amazing. There's so much art. Probably this video and the next video are really just going to be art while me talking over them. But it's a beautiful game and it just has really great flavor.